After the cowboy rescued her from the wolves, the Apache woman declared, "You're my man now." Tall pine trees rose like giants, their needles whispering with the wind, and shadows danced across the uneven ground. The air smelled of pine, earth, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers that grew in hidden patches along the forest floor. Birds called to each other from the branches above, their songs bright and lively, but there was also a quiet tension, a feeling that the wilderness, beautiful as it was, could be dangerous if one was not careful. An Apache woman moved carefully through the undergrowth. She was strong, agile, and skilled in reading the land, traits she had learned from her family and community. Every step was deliberate, her eyes constantly scanning for signs of danger, broken branches that might hint at animals passing through, fresh tracks in the soft earth, the sudden snap of twigs that could signal a predator. She carried little with her, just what she needed to survive: a small bag of food, a water pouch, and a short bow for protection. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, and her clothes, though simple, were practical and well-suited for the forest. She was traveling alone, a necessity at times for her people, as she often had errands that took her far from the village. Today, she had been sent to gather herbs from a distant valley, a task that required courage and endurance. She knew the forest was not entirely safe, but she had confidence in her skills. The sun was high and the day was warm, but she remained vigilant. As she moved deeper into the forest, the sounds around her seemed to shift. The birds quieted, the rustle of leaves grew sharper, and a sudden chill ran down her spine. She stopped, crouching low to observe her surroundings. Her instincts, honed over years of experience, told her something was not right. Then she saw it, shadows moving in the underbrush, eyes reflecting the sunlight. Wolves, a pack of them, silent and careful, slowly encircling her. Her heart raced, but she did not panic. She had faced wild animals before and had always relied on her knowledge of the land and her own quick thinking. She tried to move calmly, keeping her movements slow and controlled, hoping to avoid provoking them. The wolves, however, seemed unusually bold and hungry. Their growls were low but filled with menace. They spread out, surrounding her, their eyes locked on her every motion. She could feel the tension in the air, heavy and suffocating. She reached for her bow, not to attack immediately, but to keep them at a distance. She knew that panic could be fatal. One wrong move and the wolves might see her as prey. Her mind raced, thinking of strategies to escape. The forest around her was uneven, with fallen logs, sharp rocks, and thick underbrush, all of which could be both a help and a hazard. She remembered a small ravine nearby that could provide temporary safety if she could reach it. Taking a deep breath, she began to inch toward it, keeping her eyes on the wolves, who mirrored her movements with unsettling intelligence. Every step was calculated. She knew she could not outrun them in open ground, but she hoped to use the terrain to her advantage. A low branch snapped under her weight, and one of the wolves reacted instantly, moving closer with a growl that made her heart skip a beat. She froze, holding her breath, waiting for the right moment. Time seemed to stretch as she tried to keep calm. She whispered to herself, a habit she had developed over the years to steady her nerves. "Stay calm, think. There is always a way." Her hands trembled slightly as she nocked an arrow to her bow, ready to defend herself if necessary. She knew that hurting the wolves was only a last resort. They were part of the land, as much a survivor as she was, but she would not hesitate if they attacked. Just when the tension seemed unbearable, a sudden sound echoed through the trees, a sharp whistle, a shout, and the pounding of hooves on the forest floor. The wolves turned, startled by the intrusion. A man appeared, riding a strong, fast horse, moving quickly between the trees. His clothing was rough, worn from travel, but he carried himself with confidence and determination. He carried a rifle, but more importantly, he exuded courage that was immediately clear to the woman. The cowboy did not hesitate. He spurred his horse forward, aiming to place himself between the wolves and the woman. With skill and precision, he fired a warning shot, the sound cracking through the forest. The wolves paused, startled, and then backed away slightly. He dismounted with swift, practiced movements, his eyes scanning the pack. With careful steps and loud shouts, he managed to drive them further back, using both his weapon and commanding presence. The woman watched in awe and relief. She had known the forest was dangerous, but she had never expected anyone to arrive in time. The wolves, realizing they were outmatched, finally retreated into the deeper shadows of the forest, their eyes lingering on the two humans before disappearing completely. The cowboy approached her cautiously. His face was lined with experience, yet his eyes showed concern rather than arrogance. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice steady but kind. She shook her head, still catching her breath. Her hands were steadying themselves on her knees, and her chest rose and fell rapidly, but she was unharmed. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice calm but filled with gratitude. She had seen many travelers in her life, but few with such courage and skill. He nodded, offering her a small water flask. She accepted it, taking a few careful sips, feeling the cool liquid soothe her parched throat. They exchanged cautious words at first, each sizing up the other. The woman's pride and independence made her wary. She did not want to appear weak or overly reliant on someone else. The cowboy, on the other hand, was used to being alone, traveling across the frontier with only his horse and his wits. Yet he recognized the strength and intelligence in her eyes, the way she held herself even after such a frightening encounter. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The sun filtered through the trees, casting light on the small clearing where they stood. The birds had begun to sing again, tentative and careful, as if nature itself was acknowledging the temporary peace. The air, though still heavy with tension, carried a sense of relief and quiet respect. The woman finally spoke again, a small, almost wry smile appearing on her face. "You saved my life," she said. "I owe you more than I can say." There was a strength in her voice that made it clear she meant what she said, yet she did not offer more than necessary. It was a simple acknowledgement, but it carried weight. The cowboy nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "You would have handled yourself," he said honestly, "but I'm glad I was here." His words were simple, but they carried sincerity. There was no boastfulness, only the quiet acknowledgement of two people who had faced danger and survived. The forest around them seemed to settle into a new rhythm. The sun continued to move slowly across the sky, the shadows lengthening, the wind rustling gently through the leaves. Though the encounter with the wolves had been terrifying, it had also created a strange and unspoken bond between the two. Each recognized the courage, skill, and resilience in the other. As they prepared to move from the clearing, the woman adjusted her bow and looked around. The forest was still unpredictable, still wild, but for the first time that day, she felt a sense of security. Not because the danger was gone, it was never fully gone in the wilderness, but because she was not alone. Someone else had shared in the risk, had stood between her and a deadly threat, and had proven himself reliable and strong. The cowboy mounted his horse, waiting patiently for her to move. She hesitated for a moment, then followed, knowing that the journey was not yet over. Danger might still be nearby, but they would face it together for now. Their steps through the forest were careful, deliberate, and full of a new awareness of each other. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the trees, as if blessing the moment of survival, courage, and the unexpected beginnings of trust between a cowboy and an Apache woman who had just faced the wolves together. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig reminded them both that the wilderness was alive, full of surprises, and full of danger. But in that moment, they also knew something else. Sometimes, courage and kindness could arrive in the form of another person, someone who would risk everything to save a life. And that knowledge lingered quietly between them, stronger than fear, stronger than the memory of the wolves' growls, carrying the promise that perhaps in the vast, untamed forest, they might find not only safety but understanding, respect, and something far deeper. The forest was calmer now, but the tension of the earlier encounter still lingered in the air. The Apache woman walked beside the cowboy as he guided his horse through the uneven ground, fallen branches crunching softly under hooves and boots. Her heart still raced slightly, though less from fear and more from the realization that someone had truly risked himself to save her. She felt a mix of gratitude, caution, and curiosity. The cowboy kept a steady pace, his eyes scanning the surrounding trees as they moved forward. He knew the forest could be unpredictable. Wolves might retreat only temporarily, and other dangers could be waiting just beyond sight. Yet he carried himself with a calm confidence, showing no hesitation. His experience in the wild had taught him how to read the land, anticipate threats, and act decisively. The woman noticed this immediately, and a quiet admiration began to form. "You move well for someone alone," he said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, not boastful, and it carried a tone of respect. Not many could have stayed so steady with those wolves around. The woman gave a small nod, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I've had to learn," she replied simply. "The forest is never forgiving. You respect it or it doesn't forgive you." Her words were soft, but they carried weight. She wasn't bragging. She was stating a truth that had been part of her life since she was a child. Her people taught her to read the signs in the land, to listen to the wind, to watch the tracks of animals, and to always be aware of her surroundings. The cowboy glanced at her, his eyes reflecting interest and a subtle warmth. "Seems like you've learned a lot," he said. There was no judgment in his voice, only acknowledgement. He knew the importance of respecting the forest and the creatures within it, and he could see that she shared that understanding. As they walked, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. The woman's mind wandered briefly to her village, to the people waiting for her, and to the herbs she had been sent to gather. She realized how close she had come to disaster, and yet here she was, alive, walking with someone she barely knew, yet who had saved her life. The thought stirred something unfamiliar inside her trust. It was not something she gave lightly. The cowboy seemed to sense her thoughts. He rode slightly ahead, turning occasionally to make sure she was keeping pace. "We'll need to keep moving," he said. "It's not far to safer ground, but the forest can be tricky, especially near dusk." His words were practical, but there was an undercurrent of concern. He wasn't just thinking about the danger, he was thinking about her. She appreciated that, though she did not show it openly. Independence was a part of her identity, and she had always relied on her own skills. But there was something in the way he moved through the forest, confident, aware, protective without being overbearing, that made her feel safe in a way she had not expected. As they continued, small signs of life appeared around them. A deer bounded through a clearing in the distance, its movements graceful and alert. Birds flitted through the trees, their songs tentative but persistent. The forest, though wild and sometimes cruel, was also alive and beautiful. It was a reminder that survival was about more than strength. It was about observation, patience, and respect for the balance of life. The cowboy noticed her gaze lingering on the deer. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said softly. "The forest gives life and takes life, but it's always fair in its own way." She nodded, impressed by his understanding. "Yes, you can learn a lot if you watch closely," she said. "Even small things matter." Her voice carried a quiet authority, as though she had learned this lesson through many experiences. He nodded, sensing the depth of her knowledge and the strength it implied. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, shadows stretched across their path. The temperature dropped slightly, and a chill ran through the clearing. They needed to find a safe place to rest before nightfall. The woman scanned the area, her eyes sharp, trained to notice even the smallest signs of danger or shelter. "I see a small clearing ahead," she said, pointing with a hand. "It should be safe enough for a short rest. We can gather firewood and keep watch until dark." The cowboy agreed, and they moved toward the clearing carefully. Once there, she began collecting dry branches and twigs for a fire, while he examined the surroundings for potential threats. Their movements were coordinated, though unspoken, each aware of the other's presence and skill. It was a silent acknowledgement of teamwork, born not out of words but out of mutual need and respect. The fire was soon crackling, small flames dancing and casting warm light across their faces. The woman settled down, loosening her pack slightly to reach the water she had carried with her. The cowboy handed her a small piece of dried meat, and she accepted it with a nod of thanks. They ate in silence at first, the sound of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves filling the space between them. After a few moments, the woman spoke again. "I didn't expect anyone to come," she admitted quietly, her voice thoughtful. "The forest is usually my companion, but today I nearly lost more than I can say." The cowboy nodded, understanding without interrupting. "I was lucky to be here," he said simply. "And maybe a little more prepared than most, but you were brave. You stayed calm when you could have panicked. That matters more than luck sometimes." Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was a flicker of something more than gratitude. Respect, yes, but also curiosity, interest, and a cautious admiration. It was not love, not yet, but the seed of connection that often grows from shared danger and mutual understanding. They spent the next few hours around the fire, sharing stories in small, measured ways. She told him of her travels, of the tasks she undertook for her village, and of the lessons she had learned from her elders. He shared fragments of his life as a cowboy, his experiences riding across the frontier, the lessons he had learned about survival, courage, and respect for the land. Through these stories, a bond began to form, subtle but undeniable. Each recognized the other's strength, skill, and integrity. Neither tried to impress the other. There was no need. The danger they had faced together had already shown the truth of their character. As night fell, the forest took on a different personality. The shadows grew longer, and sounds became more mysterious. Owls hooted in the distance, and the wind rustled through the treetops like whispered secrets. Yet, in the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of one another, neither felt entirely alone. The woman felt a strange comfort in having someone watch her back, someone who had risked himself without hesitation. The cowboy felt a quiet connection he rarely experienced, a recognition of someone who understood both danger and resilience. They set a watch, taking turns keeping an eye on the perimeter. When it was her turn, she sat quietly, bow in hand, scanning the darkness and thought about the unusual turn of events. A man she had never met had entered her life under extraordinary circumstances. He had saved her from certain harm, and now they were navigating the wilderness together. It was a strange but welcome feeling, knowing she could trust him, even if only in this moment. When her turn ended, she returned to the fire where the cowboy waited. He offered her a small piece of cloth to rest her head on, a gesture of kindness that spoke volumes about his character. She nodded, accepting it without words. The fire continued to crackle, casting flickering shadows on their faces, and the forest seemed to settle around them, as if granting a temporary peace after the day's turmoil. Though neither spoke much after that, the silence was comfortable. Words were not necessary to acknowledge the bond forming between them. They had faced danger, relied on one another, and survived. That was enough for now. The forest, vast and unpredictable, held many more challenges, but for this night they were safe. And in the quiet of the forest, under the watchful eyes of the stars, a new chapter in their lives began, one shaped by courage, trust, and the knowledge that sometimes the most unlikely companions can become the strongest allies. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting long, golden rays across the forest floor. Birds chirped brightly, signaling a new day, while the wind rustled softly through the pine needles. The Apache woman stirred first, sitting up slowly by the fading embers of the night's fire. The chill of early morning made her pull her cloak tighter around her shoulders, and she took a deep breath of the crisp air, letting it clear the remnants of sleep from her mind. Beside her, the cowboy stirred on his bedroll, blinking against the sunlight that pierced the forest canopy. They moved cautiously, aware that even though the immediate danger of the wolves had passed, the forest was still unpredictable. Their journey continued, each step careful and deliberate. The woman led the way, her knowledge of the terrain guiding them along hidden paths, over fallen logs and through narrow clearings. She knew the safest routes, where water could be found and which areas to avoid. The cowboy followed closely, occasionally glancing at her, impressed by her skill and quiet confidence. "You've been traveling these forests a long time, haven't you?" he asked finally, his voice calm, curious but not intrusive. She nodded. "Since I was a child. My people taught me how to move quietly, how to read the signs of the land, and how to survive. The forest is part of our life, and you must respect it if you want to stay alive." He smiled faintly. "I've learned some of that too," he said. "But it's clear you've lived it every day. There's a difference between knowing something and actually living it." They walked in silence for a while, letting the sounds of the forest surround them. The soft rush of a nearby stream, the distant call of a hawk, and the crunch of leaves underfoot created a rhythm that matched the cautious pace of their journey. The woman occasionally paused to examine tracks, pointing out small details. A rabbit's path, the mark of a bear's claw on a tree, the faint impression of a deer's hooves. Each observation was a lesson in survival, and the cowboy listened intently, respecting her expertise without questioning it. As they continued, the conversation turned to their pasts. The woman spoke of her village, her family, and the responsibilities she carried as one of the few trusted members sent on important errands. She spoke with pride but without boasting, her words reflecting the balance of duty and independence she had learned from her elders. The cowboy shared fragments of his own life, tales of wide-open plains, cattle drives, and long days riding alone. Though his stories were simpler, they reflected courage, resilience, and the kind of wisdom gained only through experience. Each story drew them closer, revealing the similarities in their lives despite their different backgrounds. Both had faced danger, loss, and uncertainty, and both had learned to rely on themselves to survive. Yet in this shared moment, they realized the value of companionship, the comfort of someone who understands the trials of life without judgment. The sun climbed higher, and the heat of the day began to press against them. They reached a small stream, its water clear and cold, and paused to refill their water supplies. The woman knelt at the edge, scooping water into her pouch, while the cowboy watched, quietly keeping an eye on the forest beyond the bank. A sense of alertness remained, a habit ingrained by years of experience in the wild. Even in moments of calm, danger could appear unexpectedly. "Do you usually travel alone?" he asked, breaking the silence. She paused, thinking carefully before answering. "Most of the time. It's safer for certain errands, and I've learned to rely on my own skills. But the forest is not always forgiving, as today reminded me." She glanced at him, her dark eyes reflecting both gratitude and curiosity. "And sometimes, help arrives when you least expect it." He nodded, understanding her unspoken meaning. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment an unspoken bond formed, a recognition of bravery, respect, and the beginning of trust that ran deeper than simple gratitude. After a short rest, they continued along the forest path. The terrain grew more rugged, with steep inclines and narrow passages that tested their endurance. The woman led with confidence, finding stable footing where others might have slipped, and guiding the cowboy safely through. Occasionally, he would offer a steady hand to help her over a particularly tricky stretch, and she would accept it with a nod, acknowledging the gesture without breaking her independence. As the day wore on, they encountered natural challenges that required teamwork. A fallen tree blocked their path, and together they found a way over it, each relying on the other's strength and balance. A sudden rain shower forced them to take shelter beneath the thick branches of a pine grove, and they huddled close, sharing warmth and supplies. Through these small acts of cooperation, their trust deepened, each recognizing the other's reliability and skill. By mid-afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. The view took their breath away. The valley stretched far into the distance, dotted with patches of green, the river winding through it like a silver ribbon. It was a beautiful and peaceful scene, a stark contrast to the tension and danger they had faced in the forest. The woman paused, taking in the sight, and the cowboy did the same. "It's beautiful," he said quietly, almost in awe. "You don't see this from the trail." She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. "It is. My people know this land well. Every hill, every river, every tree has meaning if you pay attention. You learn to respect it." They spent some time resting on the ridge, eating a small meal and sharing stories of their lives before the journey had begun. The conversation grew more personal, revealing hopes, fears, and lessons learned through years of experience. The woman spoke of her dreams for her village, her desire to help her people, and her commitment to protecting her community. The cowboy shared his own quiet longing for a life that felt meaningful, beyond the endless wandering and challenges of frontier life. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the valley, the woman spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I never expected to meet someone like you in the forest," she admitted. "Someone who would risk themselves for a stranger, who understands danger and courage. It is rare." The cowboy looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't expect to find anyone like you either," he said honestly. "You're strong, wise, and brave. I respect that more than I can say." The moment hung between them, quiet but charged with a subtle energy. It was the recognition of shared experiences, of bravery in the face of danger, and of the unspoken connection that had formed between them. Neither rushed to define it, but both felt it, a bond that went beyond words, rooted in trust and mutual respect. As evening approached, they began the descent into the valley. The path grew narrower and more challenging, with loose rocks and steep drops that required careful navigation. The woman led the way, her balance and knowledge guiding them safely down. The cowboy followed, occasionally offering support, and together they moved like a coordinated team, each aware of the other's strengths and limitations. When they finally reached a small clearing near the river, the day's journey had taken its toll. They were tired, their muscles sore, but there was a quiet satisfaction in their accomplishment. They set up a small camp, gathering firewood and preparing a meal. The river provided fresh water, and the surrounding trees offered shelter from the evening chill. As they sat by the fire, eating and sharing small observations about the land, the conversation turned to lighter topics. They laughed softly at minor mishaps from the day, shared simple stories of past adventures, and began to relax in each other's company. The tension of the forest, the danger of the wolves, and the challenge of the journey seemed to fade slightly, replaced by a sense of companionship and understanding. The woman looked at the cowboy, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I owe you," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Not just for today, but for the way you acted. You didn't have to help me, but you did." He shook his head, a small smile on his face. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said simply. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. But I'm glad you see it that way." The night settled around them, filled with the sounds of the forest, crickets chirping, the river flowing gently, and the occasional call of a distant owl. Yet for the first time since the encounter with the wolves, the woman felt a sense of ease. She was not alone. Someone she could trust was by her side, someone who had proven courage, skill, and integrity. The cowboy, too, felt the quiet satisfaction of shared experiences, of having met someone who matched him in strength, wisdom, and resilience. As they prepared to sleep under the open sky, the stars beginning to appear one by one, they shared a small nod of understanding. Words were not needed. The bond between them had grown stronger through the day's journey. Trust, respect, and a hint of something deeper had taken root, and both knew that the days ahead would be easier with this companionship. The fire crackled softly as they settled down, the warmth of the flames contrasting with the cool night air. The woman gazed at the stars, reflecting on the unusual turn of events. A life that had been solitary and self-reliant now included another person, someone who had proven himself in the most dangerous of circumstances. It was a strange, comforting feeling, and she allowed herself a small smile. The cowboy lay back, listening to the sounds of the forest, feeling a quiet satisfaction in having shared the journey. He had met many people in his travels, but few like her, strong, intelligent, and brave. The connection they had formed in such a short time was unusual, unexpected, and entirely welcome. And so, under the quiet watch of the stars and the protective embrace of the forest, the Apache woman and the cowboy rested. Their journey together had only just begun, but the foundation of trust, respect, and companionship had been firmly laid. The challenges ahead were still unknown, but they would face them side by side, strengthened by the bond that had grown from courage, survival, and shared experience. The sun rose slowly over the valley, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Birds called softly from the treetops, and the river sparkled in the morning light. The Apache woman stirred first, stretching carefully. Her muscles ached slightly from the previous day's journey, but she felt stronger for it. Beside her, the cowboy was already awake, packing their supplies with the practiced efficiency of someone used to long days in the wilderness. The forest was calm, but both were aware that calmness could be deceptive. They had survived the wolves, but danger was never far in these lands. The woman scanned the trees around them, her eyes sharp and alert. The cowboy noticed her vigilance and respected it silently. He had learned that patience, caution, and awareness were as important as strength when facing the unknown. As they began their journey through the valley, the path became more difficult. Rocks jutted out from the ground, roots twisted across the trail, and patches of dense underbrush slowed their progress. The woman led the way, her movements steady and confident, guiding the cowboy through each obstacle. Occasionally, he offered a steadying hand or moved ahead to clear the path. They moved with silent coordination, each respecting the other's space and strength. After a few hours, the forest began to thin, revealing open plains in the distance. But with the openness came new concerns. Tracks of a rival group known for raiding travelers appeared along the path. The woman noticed them immediately, her eyes narrowing as she studied the marks in the dirt. She spoke quietly, her voice low but firm. "We are not alone. Someone has been here recently and they may still be nearby." The cowboy's expression hardened slightly. "Then we need to be careful. Keep your eyes open and your movements quiet." He trusted her instincts completely. She had survived in this land far longer than he had, and her judgment had proven reliable time and again. They moved slowly, each footstep deliberate. The sound of the wind through the grass and the rustling of leaves masked their movements somewhat, but tension hung in the air. Every shadow, every rustle could be a threat. The woman's senses were heightened. She noticed the faint glint of metal in the distance, the sound of something shifting among the rocks. She motioned for the cowboy to stop. "They're close," she whispered. "We should find cover and assess before moving forward." They ducked behind a large boulder, peering through the tall grass. In the distance, a small group of men appeared, armed and cautious. They seemed unaware of the two travelers, but the danger was clear. The cowboy adjusted his stance, ready to protect them if necessary, while the woman formulated a plan. They waited patiently, letting the group pass without incident. It was a test of endurance and patience, and they both felt the strain in their muscles and nerves. But it also strengthened their connection. They were learning to rely on each other completely, trusting that the other would act decisively if needed. Once the danger had passed, they continued, though both were aware that more challenges lay ahead. The woman spoke softly, almost to herself. Every journey has tests, sometimes the land itself, sometimes the people in it. We must be ready for both. The cowboy nodded. And we face them together, he replied. His words carried more than reassurance. They reflected the growing bond between them, the unspoken trust that had been forged through shared danger and survival. As the day progressed, the sun climbed high and the heat pressed down on them. They found a shaded area beneath a cluster of trees near a stream, a perfect spot to rest and recover. They drank water, ate a small meal, and allowed themselves a brief respite. Yet, even in this calm, tension remained, as they both knew the journey was far from over. During this break, the conversation turned to deeper subjects. The woman spoke of her village, her family, and her responsibilities. She revealed the fears she sometimes carried, the weight of duty that often pressed heavily on her shoulders. The cowboy listened, understanding more than she expected. He shared some of his own fears, the loneliness that had followed him across endless miles, and the quiet longing for someone who understood him completely. Through this sharing, their connection deepened. It was no longer just a matter of survival or gratitude. Respect had grown into something more, something personal and profound. Yet both were careful. The world they lived in was harsh, and emotions could be dangerous if exposed too quickly. Still, in the quiet of the forest, they allowed themselves glimpses of vulnerability. The afternoon brought new challenges. A sudden storm rolled in from the distant hills, dark clouds gathering quickly and winds whipping through the valley. Rain fell in heavy sheets, turning the trail slippery and treacherous. The woman led the cowboy to a sheltered area beneath a large rock overhang. They huddled together, sharing warmth as the storm raged around them. The sounds of thunder and falling rain created a tense backdrop, reminding them that nature was still very much in control. During the storm, a small argument arose, a natural result of stress and fear. The woman insisted they move to a different location for safety, while the cowboy argued it was better to stay put until the storm passed. Voices were raised briefly, tension flaring, but it quickly subsided as they realized the absurdity of quarreling in the face of survival. They laughed quietly at themselves, the storm's intensity outside highlighting the triviality of their argument. Once the storm passed, the forest was transformed. The rain had washed the leaves clean, the river swelled and sparkled, and the air smelled of fresh earth and pine. They continued their journey, navigating the slippery trail with care. The woman's guidance was invaluable, and the cowboy's steady presence provided reassurance. Together, they moved as a team, each drawing on the other's strengths. As evening approached, they reached a ridge overlooking the woman's village in the distance. Smoke rose from small fires, and the sound of voices carried faintly on the wind. The woman's heart lifted at the sight. The end of the journey was near, but so was another challenge, the acceptance of the cowboy by her people. She knew her village valued tradition and caution, and introducing an outsider could be complicated. The cowboy noticed her pause. Thinking about the next step, he asked gently. She nodded. My people are cautious. They trust actions more than words. You must show respect if you wish to be welcomed. He understood. Then we'll do it your way. I'll follow your lead. His willingness to respect her guidance without question only deepened her admiration for him. They descended carefully, the woman guiding him through familiar paths that led to the outskirts of the village. As they approached, villagers emerged, curious but cautious. The woman introduced the cowboy, explaining his role in her survival and the journey they had shared. Initial skepticism gave way to respect as the villagers saw his calm demeanor, his willingness to help, and his evident respect for the land and their traditions. That night, as they settled near the village, the woman reflected on the day's events. Danger, challenges, disagreements, and storms had tested them in every way, yet they had faced it all together. The cowboy had proven himself not just capable, but trustworthy, honorable, and courageous. She realized the connection she felt was no longer just gratitude, it was something deeper, built on shared experiences and mutual respect. The cowboy, too, felt the shift. The woman had shown resilience, wisdom, and courage, qualities he had rarely encountered in one person. The bond they had formed in the wilderness was now solidified by trials, and he recognized the beginnings of something meaningful between them. As night fell over the village, stars appearing one by one in the clear sky, they sat quietly together. Words were unnecessary. The journey had forged trust, respect, and a bond deeper than either had expected. The Apache woman who had once traveled alone now recognized the value of partnership. The cowboy who had roamed the wilderness for years now understood the rare connection that could arise from shared struggle and courage. In the quiet of the night, she finally spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "I trust you. You have shown your heart, your courage, and your respect. I am glad you were there when I needed you most." He looked at her, a mixture of pride and warmth in his eyes. "I am glad, too. We make a good team." It was a simple statement, yet it carried weight. Their journey had been more than survival. It had been the meeting of two souls who recognized each other's strength and character. And though challenges still lay ahead, they now faced them together, stronger for having endured and trusted one another through danger, conflict, and the raw power of nature itself. The morning sun rose gently over the Apache village, casting warm light on the small homes and open spaces where people were beginning their daily routines. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and the smell of fresh bread and cooking fires drifted through the air. The forest and valley surrounding the village glimmered under the early light, peaceful and serene, yet full of life. The Apache woman awoke early, as was her custom, and began preparing for the day. Today was different. Today, she would introduce the cowboy to her people, a step she had never imagined taking. Her heart beat faster with anticipation. She knew her village valued tradition, and outsiders were often met with caution. But this man was not just any stranger. He had saved her life, traveled through dangerous forests by her side, and shown courage, integrity, and respect at every turn. The cowboy rose quietly, packing their remaining supplies for the final stretch. He glanced at her and noticed her nervousness. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. She nodded. "As ready as I can be. They will watch, listen, and judge, but I trust you." That is what matters. Together, they walked toward the village, moving carefully along familiar paths. Villagers began to notice them as they approached, curious eyes peeking from behind fences, doors, and trees. The woman held her head high, her posture confident, and her expression calm. The cowboy followed, walking steadily but respectfully behind her. Their silent coordination reflected the bond formed over days of shared struggle and survival. As they reached the village center, elders emerged to meet them. Their expressions were wary, their eyes filled with questions and cautious curiosity. The woman stepped forward, introducing the cowboy and explaining his role in her rescue and their journey together. "He saved me from wolves," she said simply but firmly. "He risked himself so that I could live. He has traveled with me, faced dangers, and shown honor in every step of the way." The elders exchanged glances, their skepticism slowly giving way to respect. The cowboy remained humble, bowing his head slightly and speaking politely. "I did only what anyone should do. She is brave, and it was my honor to help her." Slowly, approval began to show on the faces of the villagers. They recognized courage when they saw it, and both the cowboy's words and his actions reflected honesty and strength. Children gathered quietly at a distance, curious and fascinated by the man who had survived the wilderness alongside the woman they knew so well. Over the next hours, introductions continued. Villagers asked questions about the cowboy's background, his travels, and his skills. He answered with honesty and simplicity, never exaggerating or boasting, which earned him further respect. The woman watched carefully, noting the change in attitude from skepticism to cautious acceptance. She realized that her people were seeing what she had already recognized, the cowboy's integrity, bravery, and worthiness of trust. The afternoon brought a sense of calm and accomplishment. The woman led the cowboy to her home, where her family greeted them warmly. Her parents and siblings, initially cautious, now welcomed him with open hearts. The cowboy showed respect for the customs and traditions of the village, listening carefully, speaking politely, and participating without question. Each gesture, each word, reinforced the trust that had already grown between him and the woman. As evening approached, the woman and the cowboy took a walk near the river at the edge of the village. The sun was low, casting golden light across the water, and the reflection of the sky created a peaceful, almost magical scene. They walked in silence for a while, letting the sounds of the river and the forest soothe their minds. Finally, the woman stopped and turned to him, her dark eyes meeting his. "You have proven yourself," she said softly, "not just to me but to my people as well. You have shown courage, kindness, and respect. You are worthy of trust." The cowboy smiled, a gentle warmth in his eyes. "I never did it for recognition," he said, "but I am glad they see what I already knew, that we make a good team." The woman nodded and a small smile appeared on her face. "Yes," she said quietly, "a very good team." There was a pause, a quiet moment filled with understanding and shared emotion. She took a step closer, her hand brushing against his. "I trust you completely," she added, her voice steady but filled with meaning. "You are my companion now, my partner. I mean what I say when I declare you're my man." The cowboy's eyes softened and he took her hand gently. "And I am yours," he replied simply. The words were not just a promise, but a reflection of the bond they had built through danger, respect, and shared experience. They had faced the wilderness together, overcome challenges, and now stood at the threshold of a new chapter in their lives, united by more than circumstance. The villagers watched from a distance, sensing the deep connection between the two. There was no need for dramatic declarations or grand gestures. The strength of their bond was evident in every glance, every gesture, every shared understanding. Respect, trust, and love had grown organically, built on shared trials and mutual admiration. That night, a small celebration took place in the village. Fires were lit, and neighbors came together to share food, stories, and laughter. The cowboy was included, welcomed into the circle not as a stranger, but as someone who had earned his place through action and character. The woman's family expressed gratitude, and her people acknowledged the courage and loyalty he had demonstrated. Around the fire, the woman and the cowboy sat side by side. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwined, a silent confirmation of their new partnership. They shared small smiles, quiet laughter, and the comfort of mutual understanding. The villagers' songs and stories filled the air, but for the two of them, the world had narrowed to the warmth of the fire, the presence of one another, and the unspoken promise of a life shared. The days that followed were filled with a sense of peace and fulfillment. The cowboy adapted to the rhythms of village life, learning customs and traditions, participating in tasks, and offering his strength where needed. The woman guided him, teaching him what he needed to know, while respecting his autonomy and experiences. Together, they became a team not only in survival but in everyday life, combining skills, knowledge, and courage. Evenings were spent by the river, sharing stories, watching the stars, and planning for the future. They laughed together, learned together, and supported each other. Their relationship deepened, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences that neither had ever anticipated. The dangers of the forest, the trials of the journey, and the challenges of introduction to the village had created a bond stronger than either could have imagined. One night, as the stars sparkled overhead and the village slept quietly, the woman turned to the cowboy. "I never thought I would find someone like you," she said softly. "Someone who understands courage, who respects life, and who stands by me without hesitation. I am grateful every day for your presence." The cowboy took her hand gently, holding it against his heart. "I never thought I would find someone like you either," he replied. "Strong, brave, wise, and kind. You've changed my life, and I will always be here for you." In that quiet moment, surrounded by the sounds of the village and the gentle rustle of the forest, they both understood that their journey had transformed them. What began as a rescue in the wilderness had grown into a partnership, a bond rooted in courage, respect, and love. The trials they had faced together had proven their resilience, and the trust they had built ensured that they would face the future side by side. The story of the cowboy and the Apache woman became a quiet legend in the village. Neighbors spoke of the bravery and loyalty displayed in the forest, of the trust and partnership that had formed under extraordinary circumstances. It was a tale not just of survival, but of connection, respect, and the unexpected ways in which lives can intertwine. Time moved forward, and the bond between the woman and the cowboy only grew stronger. Together, they faced challenges, celebrated victories, and shared the simple joys of life in the valley. Their partnership was built on equal footing, mutual admiration, and the shared understanding that true courage often comes from trust and companionship. As the sun set each evening, casting warm colors across the horizon, they would walk together along the river, hand in hand, knowing that whatever the future held, they had found something rare and precious. They had faced wolves, storms, and uncertainty, yet emerged stronger, united, and deeply connected. The Apache woman, who had once traveled alone, now had a companion she could trust fully. The cowboy, who had wandered the frontier, now had someone to share his life and his heart with. And in that quiet, enduring peace, the promise of tomorrow felt safe and bright. Together, they had discovered that courage, respect, and love could thrive even in the most unpredictable wilderness. And that sometimes, the greatest adventures are not the ones fought with danger alone, but the ones shared with someone who becomes your partner in every sense of the word.